In this video, we'll create a technical drawing. After completing this step, you'll be able to create a 2D drawing. In Fusion 360, we want to carry on with our intro to sketching design. We've added a couple extrudes and fillets, and now we're going to take a look at the basic process of creating a 2D drawing from this design. In order to do that, there are a few different ways that we can go about it. We can use the File drop-down menu, and we can select New Drawing from Design, or we can use our Workspace dropdown to go from our Design workspace to Drawing and once again select from Design. Once we do this, there are a couple options that we need to be aware of. The contents can be a full assembly, visible only, or we can manually select. While this doesn't make sense with a single body inside of this design, if we have more complicated assemblies, this becomes very handy because we can simply show the designs that we want, and then we can use the visible only. For our purposes, I'm going to leave it on full assembly. We're going to create a new drawing from scratch. We're going to change the drawing standard to ISO, and we're going to leave the rest of the options the same, and we're going to select OK. While the majority of designs in Fusion 360 are housed directly in that standard file format, which is the F3D format, creating a drawing does create an additional design that's inside of your data panel. So once it's created, you'll notice that a secondary tab has now appeared, and it's called Untitled until we save this. The first thing that we need to do is we need to place the base view. I'm going to put this in the upper left-hand corner of the drawing. Then we can manipulate some of its properties. For example, if we want to change the view, top, front, right, we can change the style. If we don't want to see the hidden lines, we can show only visible. We can change the scale. For example, if we want to use a 1-to-1 scale, we can determine what we want the edges to look like. For example, full edge in case of tangents. We can show any interference edges if we have multiple solid bodies. And if we have threads, we can show those thread edges. For now, I'm going to say OK. And now our first drawing has been created. In the browser, you'll notice it looks a little bit different. And in the bottom, we don't have a timeline. That's because in a drawing, we're not capturing tools that are being used. What we have instead is display of the sheets of our drawing. And the browser does still have critical information, but in this case, it's going to show us the different sheet properties, as well as the different references for each view. For example, if I want to add an additional view, I can use a projected view, and I can simply project these out into different areas, and then I can use this green check mark to continue. These are all referencing this original view, and they're views that are created based on that reference. By default, they're going to bring in all of our parent settings, such as the scale, the visibility of edges, as well as the shading that we selected. You'll also note in the bottom right-hand corner, we have what's called a title block. The title block houses information about the drawing. And while some of it is automatically populated, such as the name of the design, the user based on your Autodesk account, and the date, some of the other information is not created automatically, and we need to enter it manually. To do this, you can double click on the title block, and it's going to bring up the different areas with some attribute notes that allow us to quickly and easily add information. For example, the drawing number. If my drawing number was 1001, I can enter that, and then I can finish my properties. Now that is going to be entered into my title block, and it'll be seen when we print or turn this into a PDF. Drawings are extremely handy for us to convey technical information, and there are no shortage of things that we can add. For example, parts tables or information about sheet metal parts. We can add symbols or text notes, but probably the most basic thing that we want to do is add our geometry and dimensions. For this example, the first thing I'm going to do is add some center marks. I'm going to select my fillets, and I'm going to place center marks based on those fillets. While this isn't strictly necessary for all designs, it is important to understand how we do this. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add some dimensions. From the side, I'm going to add an overall height dimension of 1.5 inches, and then I'm going to add a height dimension to that first section of 1 inch. So this easily tells me how tall the entire design is and how tall that first step is. I can also add some overall dimensions for the length, or I can dimension this rectangular portion specifically at 3.5. And we're going to go ahead and go from this point to this point at 2.5. So once again, that gives me a very good idea of the size of our part. We can also use this standard dimension tool to get things like angles. For example, 135 degrees between those two edges. We can also get a look at the distance from center points or radius or diameter values. For example, if we want to know the radius value on that corner, we can select the outside and the inside. We can also do this in other views. For example, if we wanted to dimension the radius in this view, we can grab that and we can add that radius value. From here, if we have any overlapping dimension lines, we can use the dimension dropdown, select dimension break, and we can select those overlaps. And then we can create a dimension break so that way it's easier for us to read. Notice how it broke these dimensions here as well as this dimension based on our selections. This is a basic look at creating a detailed drawing. I'm going to go back to a fit to view and I'm going to save this, noting that it is creating a brand new design. This is called my Intro to Sketching, which is the name of my design, and it simply puts drawing after it. Just like any of the other references, if we make any changes, it'll save a new version for us. But what if we go back and we modify the original sketch? Let's come back in here, let's edit our sketch, and let's increase some of these dimensions. For example, instead of 3.5, let's make this 5 inches long. Notice that we now get this overlap. I'm going to increase the size of this to 3.5 inches. It automatically updates my extrudes. I can go ahead and I can save a new version of this. And when I go back to my detailed drawing, it tells me that it's out of date. The original drawing was referencing version 2, but now a new version exists. We can simply left click on this icon, we can update it, and notice that all my dimensions updated as well. This rectangle is now 5 inches by 2.5, and we didn't add a dimension to the smaller square, but you'll notice that the size did increase as well. If we need to make any adjustments to the drawings based on that, we can change the scale, and we can go back down to a half scale. We can close that, and now you can see everything fits easily on the screen. If we want to reposition any of our dimensions, we simply need to select them, hold down the left mouse button on the gray block inside of the dimension, and move it to a new position. We can do this for my radius value, and we can move any of the dimensions around as needed. I'm going to go back to a fit to screen and make sure that I save this before moving on.